Blind triplets abandoned at birth. 18 years later, they become heroes of hope. Welcome to Cracks of Light, where we bring real-life stories that shine through the darkest corners of humanity. That on a frozen winter night, an elderly couple opened their front door to find a worn-out basket on their porch. Inside were 3 newborns, tiny, silent, unmoving. But it wasn't the cold that froze them. It was something else. They were blind. No note, no names, just a whisper from fate. Please save them. Most people would have closed the door. But Peter and Anna didn't. They chose to open their hearts instead. And what happened in the next 18 years? It didn't just change their lives. It moved an entire nation to tears. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Cracks of Light. Your support gives us the strength to keep telling stories that matter. Now, let's step into this unbelievable journey. One of darkness, love, and a light that no eyes could ever see. Under the howl of the winter wind, the knock was barely audible. A gentle tap, almost apologetic, as if whoever left it behind knew it was wrong. Peter stirred first, his ears sharper than sleep allowed, and Anna, still wrapped in her wool blanket, turned toward him as he sat up. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice hoarse, unsure. Another knock. No, not a knock. A soft bump like something being placed carefully outside. He rose without another word, slipped on his worn boots, and cracked the wooden door open. A wave of cold air rushed in, pulling the weak firelight into the white void beyond the porch. There, nestled in the frost, was a basket, old, cracked, and barely holding together. Snow had already gathered on the rim. He stepped forward, heart pounding. 3 small bundles, shivering. Tiny faces flushed red from the cold, their eyes closed tight. He reached down and saw the note first. Smudged ink, trembled letters, barely readable. "Please save them." "We can't." His breath caught. He lifted the first bundle. No response to light. No flinch. Just a twitch, a soundless cry. Anna was at his side now, her hands already reaching. One by one, they lifted them into the warmth of the house, hands trembling as they wrapped the babies in what blankets they could find. "Peter," she whispered, "they're blind." Her voice cracked. He looked at her, saw her eyes glisten, and said nothing. He knelt, staring at the infants on the floor, now breathing deeper, tiny mouths quivering. "We can't just," she started but didn't finish. She didn't have to. He already knew. He moved to the fireplace, added wood, stoked the flames higher. "They stay," he said. "If someone comes to claim them, we'll let them go. But until then, they stay." And so it began. 3 children, not born of them, but left to them. 3 newborns who would never see the light, cradled now in the flickering glow of a modest hearth. Anna named them that morning. Luca, for strength. Mira, for peace. Ellis, for light, even if she'd never see it. The days that followed were chaos and silence. Anna, once rigid and routine, found herself awake at every hour, listening for the softest sighs. Peter burned himself twice learning to warm milk without scalding it. Changing diapers became comedy and tragedy in equal measure. Luca cried at night until his lungs failed him. Mira barely moved. Ellis, the smallest, had trouble feeding. Their blindness wasn't the only weight. They were weak, underdeveloped, barely clinging on. The village whispered before long. That house at the end of the road? What were they doing? Who brings home 3 babies in the dead of night? And why those 3? Someone said the children were cursed. That blindness was sign. Another murmured about karma, punishment from God. Anna stopped going to the market. Peter kept his head down when he walked past the chapel. But they didn't speak of it. Inside the house, there were other things to worry about. Luca began to flinch at sounds. Mira didn't cry, but held tight to Anna's scarf like it was life itself. Ellis would hold her breath until she turned purple, if not soothed. Still, they kept going. Peter cut up old flannel shirts to make swaddles. Anna fashioned soft toys from spare cloth, shapes they could touch, press against their cheeks. No colors, no pictures, just textures, warmth, voices. She sang again, something she hadn't done in years. Soft lullabies her mother once used on her, now given to 3 children that might never hear music the way others did, but still quieted at her voice. One afternoon, Peter was heating water when he heard something strange, a word. He turned. Luca, sitting propped against a cushion, reached a hand toward the sound. He said again. Peter dropped the kettle. His hands trembled. He crouched and pulled the boy close. I'm here, he whispered. I'm here, son. The boy smiled, not because he saw anything, but because he felt the warmth in that voice. That night, Peter didn't sleep. He sat in the rocking chair, holding Luca, staring into the fire. His voice low, barely more than breath, he whispered, They don't see the world, but I see them. That's enough. Anna stood behind him, hand on his shoulder. They were no longer just two people mourning what they never had. They were parents, not by biology, by choice, by action. The village's whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew harsher. Someone slipped a note through the door one morning. They'll bring ruin. Send them away. Peter read it once, then tossed it in the fire. Anna didn't even ask. She was too busy tending Ellis's fever, pressing cool cloth to the girl's head as she muttered nonsense in her sleep. They survived the winter that way, barely. And in spring, when the snow melted and the days grew long, the children began to change. Mira found joy in the sounds of water running, the breeze brushing against wind chimes Peter had strung outside. Ellis became bold, crawling into everything, knocking over furniture without care. Luca tapped on bowls and jars, finding rhythms. The house, once solemn, was now filled with strange symphonies. By summer, they were no longer strangers in that home. They were roots, deepening with each day. Peter built a shelf low to the ground for their toys. Anna braided their hair each morning, humming. One evening, while feeding the mashed potatoes and carrots, she paused and looked at Peter. If someone came today, if they said, "Give them back," would you? Peter shook his head. No one's coming, he said. They were never theirs to begin with. She nodded. Neither of them said it aloud, but both knew no one would come. And if they did, it would be too late. The children weren't orphans anymore. The bond was already carved in sleepless nights, in blisters from washing too much laundry, in laughter and spit-up, and lullabies sung through tears. They didn't see the world, but they shaped it, shifted the axis of two old lives into something new, something neither Anna nor Peter could ever have predicted. One day, when Mira reached for Anna's face and pressed her tiny hand to her cheek, Anna whispered, "You're mine." It wasn't a declaration. It was a truth, something rooted like breath. Peter watched from the door, the sunset casting gold across the floor. He didn't smile. He just exhaled, a slow, long breath, like letting go of an old pain. The town never really accepted them. Some nodded when passing. Others turned away. But it didn't matter. Inside that wooden house at the edge of the trees, a family had formed. Not in light, not in sight, but in something stronger. In touch. In sound. In quiet love. Luca didn't speak much, but every day he found his way to the corner of the room where the old wooden guitar leaned against the wall. He would run his fingers along the strings, press one ear close, and try to copy the rhythms Peter had once hummed. At first, it was just noise, random strums, uneven and flat. But over time, his hands learned. He knew where each string was by the way it resisted his touch, by the vibrations that lingered in the wood. Mira, quieter than the others, was always holding something in her hands. A piece of fabric, a small book with embossed pages. Anna had managed to get her a set of Braille cards from the nearby school. She couldn't read at first, just brushed her fingers over the raised dots without knowing what they meant. But Anna sat with her, repeated each letter, tapped her hand gently every time she got one right. "You'll learn by feeling, not by seeing," she said. Mira nodded, didn't say a word, but didn't stop trying. Ellis never slowed down. She moved like she was on fire, bumping into walls, knocking over chairs, falling, getting up again. Her knees were always bruised. Her elbows scraped, but she laughed the loudest. She ran her fingers along the walls to map out the house, touched every surface, memorized every crack in the floorboards. When she tripped, she rolled. When she hit something, she cursed in her own way, grunted, then smiled and kept going. Peter once told Anna, "That girl's going to break something one day." Anna just shook her head. Better a table than her spirit. The three of them learned the world differently. They didn't follow light, they followed warmth. They didn't look, they listened. The clink of the spoon meant food. The smell of mint meant bath time. The creak in Peter's knee gave away where he was sitting. Every sense they had worked double. They remembered voices, heartbeats, the texture of footsteps on the floor. Anna often said, "If they don't have eyes, then I'll be their eyes through this heart." She didn't say it to be poetic. She meant it. She described everything. The color of apples, the way snowflakes melted, the look Peter gave when he was proud but didn't say anything. At night, she told them stories. She described the world not as it was, but as it could feel. She turned sunsets into warm hands, forests into a sense of pine and soil, rivers into the sound of laughter. They asked questions. Luca wanted to know what blue looked like. Mira asked what stars felt like. Ellis once asked if they were broken. Anna didn't pause. "No," she said. "You were made different, but not broken." That answer stayed, not just in their minds, but in how they moved. They didn't cry when they hit the floor. They didn't complain when others stared. They kept going, because they had been told they could, because they believed it. Even if they couldn't see the path, they walked it anyway. The day they left was silent. No one spoke much during breakfast. Anna packed their clothes in 3 small bags, each one labeled with a patch so they could recognize by touch. Peter stood by the door longer than usual, fingers tightening around the old coat he hadn't worn in years. The school wasn't far, just a few towns away, but it felt like another world. The van came right after noon. The driver greeted them with a smile that tried to hide discomfort. He didn't say much, just loaded the bags, asked if they were ready. Luca held his cane tightly, tapping the ground as he walked. Mira followed close behind, hand brushing the wall of the house for the last time. Ellis didn't speak. She just kept her head high, her mouth set. Anna kissed each of them, one by one. When she got to Ellis, she bent down and whispered, "Don't let anyone tell you what you're not." Ellis nodded, but didn't say anything back. The drive was quiet. The three sat together in the back, feeling every bump in the road, listening to the tires hum against the frozen asphalt. Mira kept her fingers locked in Luca's. Ellis leaned against the window, though she couldn't see what passed. She counted the turns instead. When they arrived, it was colder than expected. The school looked like a hospital. Clean. Too clean. The walls were pale. The rooms had no warmth. A woman named Clara met them at the gate. She spoke softly, introduced herself, guided them through the halls. She said it would take time, that the others here were like them, that they would learn faster, grow stronger. But none of them felt it. Not yet. The first night was the worst. Luca didn't sleep. He lay stiff on the cot, arms by his sides. Mira cried quietly, but didn't let anyone hear. Ellis sat up in bed, gripping the sheets, her mouth set in a hard line. Morning came too soon. The other children weren't cruel. Not outright, but they whispered. They laughed when Ellis bumped into a desk. They mocked the way Mira held her spoon wrong. One boy snatched Luca's cane and waved it just out of reach. "Bet you don't even know what I look like," he said. Luca didn't reply, just stood there, still, until the boy gave it back. Ellis got in trouble by the 3rd day. She tried to climb over the fence behind the gym. Clara found her halfway up, bleeding from her palms. "You can't run from this," she said. Ellis didn't answer. The food was different. The routine strict. Lessons were hard. They had to learn how to move in groups, how to read in silence, how to respond to bells and commands. Luca adjusted first. He liked structure. He memorized the schedule fast. He started learning Braille faster than anyone expected. Mira struggled. Her hands shook when she read. She was scared of making mistakes. Her teachers told her to slow down. She tried, but every time someone raised their voice, she flinched. Ellis resisted everything. She wouldn't follow the rules. She didn't like to sit still. She wanted to run, to move, to talk. One day she fell. Hard. Running in the courtyard, she slipped on a patch of wet stone. Blood ran down her leg. Her palm scraped. The other kids gasped. A few laughed. She didn't cry. She sat up slowly, stared into the space ahead, and said, "I can't see, but I know how to get up." Then she stood. Clara saw it from the window. She said nothing, just turned away. Word spread. Slowly, things shifted. The children began to respect them. not because they were strong, but because they never gave up. Luca helped others learn Braille. Mira started reading out loud to the younger ones. Ellis, somehow, became the loudest voice during lunch breaks. She told stories, made up characters, made people laugh. She didn't follow the path. She made her own. Anna and Peter visited once a month. They brought food, extra scarves, stories from the village. Each time, the kids seemed taller, more confident, less afraid. On one visit, Anna asked Luca if he was happy. He said, "I don't know what happy looks like, but I think this might be it." On the way home, Anna cried in silence. Peter didn't say anything, just kept his hand on hers. That winter, Ellis wrote her first sentence in Braille. "I can't see the stars, but I know they're there." She pressed the paper into Anna's hands the next time she visited. Anna didn't read it out loud. She just held it to her chest and smiled. Luca turned 18 a week before spring. He didn't throw a party, didn't ask for gifts. That morning, he simply sat down across from Peter and said, "I want to find them." Peter didn't need to ask who. The silence said it all. Anna was the one who spoke first. "Not to blame them," Luca continued. "I just need to understand." Peter didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and said, "Then we'll help you." Mira and Ellis agreed without hesitation. "We started this together," Ellis said. "We finish it together." The search wasn't easy. The note left in the basket had only one clue, a town name, partly smudged by snow and time. Peter made a few quiet calls. Anna contacted an old nun she once knew who worked with abandoned children. It took months, but eventually, someone remembered. A delivery nurse who had seen a young couple leave the hospital in silence after learning their babies were blind. The village was small. A few streets, a church, some fields. The day they arrived, Mira held her coat tighter, fingers shaking slightly. Ellis was unusually quiet. Luca walked ahead, cane tapping with confidence, but shoulders tight. The first house belonged to a man named Tomas, their birth father. He lived alone, in a shed turned into a makeshift home. When he heard Luca's voice, he froze. "Who are you?" he asked, though part of him already knew. "Luca," the boy replied. "Your son." Tomas didn't answer, just stared, as if trying to see past the years. "I'm not here to hurt you," Luca added. "I just want to know why." The man sat down slowly, pulled a cigarette from a rusted tin, didn't light it. "You were all born blind," he said. "I didn't know what to do. I panicked. I told their mother it was better to leave you. I thought it would be harder to watch you suffer. Or maybe I was just scared." His hands trembled. "I still don't sleep right." Luca stood still, his face unreadable. "We didn't suffer," he said. "We lived. We were loved." Tomas looked down. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to be sorry," Luca replied. "Just don't lie about why." Tomas looked up, eyes red. "Then here's the truth. I failed you." Luca nodded once, turned away, and whispered, "That's enough." Myra's meeting was quieter. Their mother, Elena, lived with another family now. She came to the door in a faded dress, holding a dish towel. When Mira introduced herself, Elena dropped it. "I thought you'd never come." Mira didn't speak right away. Elena pulled her into the house, sat her down, poured water, even though Mira didn't ask. "I was young. I didn't know how to be a mother, especially to children with challenges. Everyone said it would ruin our lives. Your father couldn't handle it. He was angry, cold." Mira listened, fingers tracing the rim of the glass. "I'm not here to change your past," she said. "I just wanted to hear it. From you." Elena cried. Mira didn't. She just said, "You don't have to be afraid of me. I made it. I'm okay." Then she stood and walked out, leaving her mother in tears. Ellis didn't ask for help. She wandered the village alone until someone pointed her toward a small shop by the edge of town. A woman named Marta worked there, an aunt. The woman stared at her long and hard. "You look like your mother," she said. Ellis shrugged. "Don't know what she looks like." Marta didn't deny it. "She left. Moved south. Never talked about you. She pretended you didn't exist." Ellis said nothing for a while. Then she asked, "Why did they give us up?" Marta sighed. "Because they thought the world would never accept you. So they let it swallow you before it had the chance." Ellis tilted her head. "But it didn't." Marta blinked. "No, it didn't." That night, the three sat under a tree outside the village, backs against the trunk, the sounds of their breathing steady and synced. They were scared, Lucas said. Too scared to keep us. Mira nodded. But not enough to search for us after. Ellis leaned back. Do you hate them? She asked. No one answered for a while. Then Lucas said, no, not anymore. Mira added, I thought I would. But now I just feel clear. Ellis smiled. Then it's all I needed. They left without fanfare. No final golonbis. No closure speech. Just the decision to walk away, heads high, hearts steady. On the train back, Anna met them at the station. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't need to. She opened her arms. All three leaned in. No one said it, but everyone knew. The past was real, but it wasn't their home. What they had with Peter and Anna, that was home. That was family. Luca didn't speak when he stepped into the small wooden shack again. His father looked thinner, smaller somehow. The smell of old tobacco and dust still lingered in the air. Tomas sat silently in the corner, staring into the floor, as if waiting for something he wasn't sure he deserved. Luca approached slowly, unzipping the old canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Inside, he pulled out a hardbound notebook, thick pages pressed together with care. I want you to feel this, he said, and placed his father's trembling hands on top of the braille. Tomas didn't know how to read it, but his fingers stayed. Luca guided his fingertips slowly across the surface. This is my journal. I wrote every word. My life. My memories. The first time I walked without help. The first time I played music. Every time I felt loved. Tomas swallowed hard. I'm not asking for anything, Luca continued. Not regret. Not redemption. Just for you to know I survived. That I was loved better than you could imagine. Tomas's lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes were wet. He tried to say thank you, but failed. Luca stepped back, voice steady, and I love them. My real parents. The ones who stayed. He turned to leave, pausing only to add, but I don't hate you anymore. You're just part of the story. Mira didn't go inside. She stood near the fence outside her birth mother's home, holding a small handheld recorder close to her lips. She pressed the red button and started to speak. I was told you cried when I left. That you were scared. That you were young. I don't know if that's enough, but it's something. Her voice was calm. I can't picture your face. I never saw it. I don't even know what color your eyes are. But I remember your voice today, and that's what I'll keep. She paused, listening to the breeze, then whispered, I forgive you, not because you asked, but because I need peace more than I need answers. She clicked the recorder off and tucked it in her coat. A quiet strength settled in her chest. She didn't knock on the door. She didn't need to. Ellis waited until evening. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the fields behind the school where she used to run. She walked out alone, came tapping lightly across the gravel, stopping in the middle of the wide, open grass. No one was around. She took a deep breath and spoke aloud, even though no one could hear her. I thought I hated you. For a long time, I thought the only way to move on was to stay angry. But it's heavy, and I'm tired. She knelt down, fingers pressing into the dirt. You weren't strong enough to keep me, but I'm strong enough to forgive you. Her voice didn't tremble, not because you earned it, but because I deserve to live without this weight. She stood again, face turned toward the wind, and smiled faintly. That was the last time she spoke of them. The train ride home was quiet but not heavy. Mira leaned her head on Luca's shoulder, her recorder resting in her lap. Ellis sat by the window, feet pulled up, listening to the wheels turning. Anna and Peter were already waiting at the station, arms open. No questions. No need. Peter held them all together, his hands firm and certain. Anna cried. Ellis laughed when she saw her. We came back, she said. Anna hugged her tighter. You always would. They returned to the village not as lost children, but as people who had walked through fire and chose to carry the warmth, not the burn. The house felt smaller somehow, but warmer too. Peter added an extra shelf near the fireplace, just for Luca's journals. Anna cleared the old sewing corner and placed Myra's recording gear on a small desk there. Ellis's running shoes stayed by the door, lined up like soldiers. The village didn't change, but the way the village saw them did. There were still stares, but fewer whispers. No one asked about their eyes anymore. People started asking about their lives instead. Lucas spent his mornings at the community center, A converted barn Peter had once used for tools. Now it held a keyboard, a sound mixer, a few cheap microphones. Local kids came to listen. Sometimes parents. Luca didn't teach with theory. He taught through story. I couldn't see the piano, he'd say, but I could hear my fingers find the right path. He composed simple pieces, some cheerful, some slow and aching. One of them, written after visiting his birth father, was called Still Breathing. Someone uploaded a clip of him playing. A week later, a center for blind children in Croatia asked him to visit. He went, and returned with more songs. Mira didn't leave the house much, but her voice traveled further than anyone imagined. She wrote short stories in Braille, recorded them late at night in the soft quiet of the kitchen. Her first audiobook was titled I Remember Without Eyes. It was picked up by a support network for visually impaired teens in Germany. One listener wrote, "Your voice is like sitting near a fire when the world outside is cold." She read that message out loud to Anna, who cried quietly behind her hands. Mira didn't speak much about her birth mother, but one night she recorded a message and sent it to her. Just an audio file. It ended with, "You helped bring me into this world. Someone else helped me live in it. I don't hold that against you anymore." Ellis never stayed still. She trained daily, rain, snow, wind. She ran through the same fields where her cane had once tapped cautiously. Now she sprinted. No cane, just the sound of her coach's voice through a wireless headset. Her first race was clumsy. The second, better. By the third, she crossed the line grinning with blood on her knees and a bronze medal around her neck. Peter held her cheeks and said, "You don't need eyes. You got fire." The fourth race? Gold. National Paralympic Trials. A newspaper printed her photo with a headline, "The blind girl who runs like she sees light." She framed it, but left it in Peter's workshop. They never tried to be inspirational. They just did what they loved, how they could. That was enough. The living room became a studio. The yard a track. The kitchen a story booth. Every Sunday, they sat together for dinner. Fish soup, hard bread, laughter. Sometimes Ellis joked too loud. Sometimes Mira rolled her eyes. Sometimes Luca drifted into silence, humming melodies only he understood. Peter and Anna watched, not saying much, hands occasionally brushing over the table, like reminders that they were still here, still holding the light. One day, a teacher from Austria wrote to Mira, "My students are